Welcome to the Unlist. I thought I might do something a little different this time and offer some weird, quirky, left of center alternatives to more popular, more common fragrances. And these weird, quirky alternatives are similar enough that they could serve almost the same purpose, but have just a slightly different tweak or approach to the same basic composition or theme that it may be just refreshing enough to make it worth switching out the more popular, more common item for this item. Now, I will give you a caveat, and that is some of these are discontinued, so they may be more expensive than what they're replacing. But in some cases, it's about the same, or you'll break even. Maybe you'll pay a little less, depends. But we're not really doing this for price. I'm not offering you an alternative based on price point. I'm offering you an alternative based on being basically the same type of fragrance with a more unique, slightly more interesting, perhaps, twist on the theme, right? That's what we're going for here. So let's start this off right and pick probably one of the most popular fragrances that I want to do in this video, right? Or this instead of that, right? So the fragrance I'm doing a this instead of that on is this Freshwater by Bath and Body Works instead of that Acqua di Gio Pour-Homme by Giorgio Armani. Now, as some of you may know, Acqua di Gio has recently been reformulated, and the new updated bottles are slightly different than this. They are a bit rounder, a bit more plush in the base. The opening is basically the same. That same persimmon, ozonic, lemon, and dry, salty marine notes. But the base is, I should say, less crunchy in the new one. It's smoother, rounder, a bit softer. So it feels more refined. It's one of the few times where I say that a reformulation actually improves a fragrance. And I did, my last video was about that. But if you are a fan of this original 96 until 2024, I guess, right? So almost a 30-year run, 28 years of this. If you like this formula or this variation, you don't want the new stuff, right? Right now, there's plenty of this out there. It's not expensive. You can still buy it retail. You can still get it pretty much anywhere. And actually, the bigger bottles like this are going to sell out more slowly because people don't want a big 200 ml like this. So if we are talking about backing up your Acqua di Gio, right, get this big massive bottle, they'll be more commonly available. The 100 mils and the 50 mils are going to sell out first because everybody goes for the smaller sizes first. But yeah, this is the one to get. However, if you want a different fragrance that scratches the same itch as the original Acqua di Gio, then get you the Bath and Body Works. I know some of you are going to say, but Bath and Body Works is cheap. They don't last very long, blah, blah, blah. And let me tell you, modern day Acqua di Gio is not a beast mode fragrance anyway. Maybe the old 90s bottles were really strong. I've heard people tell me that the original formula was, much louder than the current one. So if you're used to the more recent bottles from the last, say, 10, 15 years anyway, this is actually not much different in strength than this. It really isn't. And I've worn both I've worn both very, very much, and I can tell you there's not much difference. Now, smell-wise, there is a very keen difference, and this is what makes me choose this particular fragrance as my this instead of that. And the reason is the citruses. You will get a much stronger, big old blast of neroli in the top note of this. There's really no perceptible neroli in the Acqua di Gio. I don't really get any neroli, but this has neroli in it, so it kind of reads almost like someone tried to take like neroli Portofino or something, and you know, cut off just the very top of it. Take the very top off neroli Portofino or neroli Portofino. I know people get on me because I say neroli instead of neroli. Potato, okay. You know, Pak your Ka and Harvard Yard, whatever. Okay, it's just the way I talk. You guys can just get over it, or you can unsub my channel. I don't give a fuck. But anyway, neroli Portofino. It's like someone took the top of that, the very top of that, and just pushed it onto Acqua di Gio. And then there's some green notes in this, and it's a little bit more mossy. Not that Acqua di Gio was ever a very mossy fragrance anyway, but the Avernal it used was there, and I guess the older bottles had real oak moss in them too. But the moss note, I'm not saying actual oak moss, but the moss note is stronger in this. So bright neroli, more herbal green notes, and a bit more oak moss makes this feel, to me, just a bit more interesting, honestly. And then the best part about it is, because it's Bath and Body Works, it's inexpensive. You can spray this all you want. That's just why I don't care if it's not strong or whatever. You can just spray it all you want. And then you can get bar soap, you can get body wash, you can get deodorant, you can get lotion. And if you use all those things together, if you layer all those products up, you're going to be like nuclear reactive radiating this smell all day anyway with all the other products. So it's kind of a no-brainer. Next up in my this instead of that, I will say you could buy Paco Rabanne Pour Homme classic aromatic fougere, the one that really put aromatic fougères on the map, moved us away from all the vanilla and the powder and the big carnation notes. You guys, if you know your history, you know that fougères in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s were very heavy on vanilla and very heavy on tonka and carnation notes. They were very either powdery or just very sweet and round, the barbershop vibe. But the Paco Rabanne Pour Homme really pulled us away from that. And part of that was Paco Rabanne was sort of vibing on Sir Irish Moss, which is a German aftershave, vibing on the Irish Spring soap, which came out a couple years earlier. So that whole Irish vibe trickled down into other products, and eventually that whole Accord style with the rosewood and the chewy herbs and the clean top notes and the patchouli in the base, all of that filtered down into this and set standards. But as time would go on, musks would change, moss would get dialed back. A lot of people became unhappy with the more recent bottles. I enjoy the modern bottles. I actually have a modern bottle. See, I have a more recent bottle of Paco Rabanne pour rum, so I don't have a problem with it. But if you're unhappy with the direction that the line is taken, then instead of that, you get this. Patrick by Fragrances of Ireland. We've come full circle. At some point, the Irish realized that all of these Irish spring type fragrances, which have literally fuck all to do with Ireland, there's nothing Irish about Irish spring, honestly, but at some point they wanted in on that. So someone got the idea of creating a tourist fragrance brand called Fragrances of Ireland. They are sold at all the tourist traps. They are sold at all of the gift shops around Ireland. So if you're a Yank or you're coming over from the EU and you're visiting Ireland and you walk into any of the gift shops to get your shillelagh and your little leprechaun hat and all that other bullshit, right? Your little Celtic knot and stuff to put over your rearview mirror in your car. One of the things they're going to hit you with is the Fragrances of Ireland, and they've got one called Innis, which is the women's fragrance, and then they've got one called Patrick, which is the men's fragrance. And lo and behold, it smells almost exactly like Irish spring soap. In fact, this smells more like Irish spring soap than the Paco Rabanne does. It's like one for one. Now, I'm referring to the original Irish spring soap. The more recent ones are different. They've changed the formula of the bars. They don't quite smell the same, but the old ones, this stuff. So, how does that compare to Paco Rabanne, though? It's a bit rounder, a bit muskier. I get a bit of a Koros vibe in here. So there's some kind of like slightly honeyed thing in here. And it's just a bit more on the white florals like Koros has. No civet or Cinnarome animalis in this case. I mean, it's not actual civet, but it creates like a civet type note. But there's no real civet in Koros. This doesn't have that either, but it just kind of has a tiny bit of that muskiness. And it's a good alternative, and it's inexpensive. It says cologne spray, but this is definitely like an eau de toilette. So it'll last a while. But yeah, if you want something a little bit quirkier, a little bit different, and Paco Rabanne's not really getting it done anymore, get the Patrick. So, another alternative. Aha. This one may get a bit contentious because some of you are very obsessed, especially with older bottles of this particular fragrance. It's another one like Koros and Polo, where people get they get almost like a certain like identity politics kind of mindset with it, where I consume vintages, therefore I am kind of weird. I don't know. I try not to dissect it too much, but I understand that if you only want the made in Italy bottles by, I think it was Euro Italia or whatever, with the paper label in the front, then this whole conversation is not going to appeal to you anyway. But if you're someone who doesn't have those really early bottles, and you've got the more recent ones, this may actually appeal to you. So here we have Dolce and Gabbana Pour Homme, originally launched in 1994. This fragrance, like I said, has lots of very obsessive fans, highly contentious. They made an Intenso flanker that they eviscerated, they absolutely hated. And, well, this particular bottle, this bottle is from the dreaded P&G era. Okay, this is one of the worst bottles you could own, the one that they tell you to stay away from. And honestly, I can understand. Not as round, not as plush. The tobacco note is much drier and more in your face. The lemon is more stark, and people will say cheap, and I'm not going to disagree with that. Ultimately, though, when the fragrance dries down and it's been on your skin for like an hour, it still smells nice. It kind of gets you to the same place. It's just the way I can look at it is it's a bumpier ride. The original bottles, the Euro Italia bottles with the paper label on them, much smoother. So they are very nice, dry down into the base. These P&G bottles, they kind of do this. They like you're riding on coilover suspension, right? Really rough race car suspension. But once you get there and you're at the dry down, it's still a pleasant fragrance. But there's an alternative. So instead of that, any modern bottle, I don't care, you can have this, Realities for Men, by Realities Cosmetics, aka Liz Claiborne under a different name. So this fragrance has a weird story, and I could almost give it its own video, but Realities was a fragrance launched by Liz Claiborne in 1989. It came shortly after the original Liz Claiborne women's fragrance. It was like the follow-up, basically. And it didn't stay on the market very long. Had a cool bottle, but didn't stay on the market very long, and it was discontinued. Well, they held on to the trademark, I guess, for Realities. So about 15 years later, 2004, about 15 years later, they decided to relaunch Realities, the women's fragrance, a whole different fragrance, a whole new fragrance. Not the same one from the late 80s, just the same name. They relaunched Realities, and they made a men's version. And this is the men's version. The women's version had a pink juice. Men's version is the green stuff. But the bottle is basically the same. They treated it as a separate brand, like a sub-label. Didn't have Liz Claiborne anywhere on the packaging. The only way you really know it's Liz Claiborne is if you do your little industry due diligence. You go digging up who owns what. And the addresses are the same and all that. So you can tell pretty quickly. Now, Realities was also strange in that it was sold originally online, exclusively online. And this was the early days of online shopping, so we're talking about eBay was just getting started. Amazon was still very young. People weren't even on Facebook yet, not really. So it was uncharted waters for a brand to launch exclusively online, and it did about as well as you thought it would do, which means it didn't do well at all. So very quickly, Liz Claiborne did a U-turn and started dumping all of the Realities stock into the usual suspect stores. So your Kohl's, your Walmart, your Target, your Kmart's, which were still around back then, all of your big box retailers and drugstores and stuff. So suddenly every corner store and big box store was flooded with these realities bottles, men's and women's realities. And no one knew what it was, but it was all marked down because they were trying to sell it since the online thing didn't work too well for them. And it was just a flash in the pan. And for a very long time, these were very inexpensive. Now, being discontinued, it may actually cost you more to buy this than it does to buy a bottle of this. But if you don't like this formula or the more recent ones, you're not a fan, then this still might be a more viable alternative, because even though this is discontinued, it's still cheaper. It's still cheaper than a deep vintage 94 bottle of Dolce and Gabbana. So if you don't want to pay that scalper's fee for those older bottles and you don't like the newer bottles, you can buy this. There are differences. This is not a clone. This is not a clone. The quirkiness of it, what makes it different, is that there's violet in here. There's not really any violet in the original Dolce & Gabbana, nor is there violet in any of the newer bottles, but you get a very big violet leaf right down the middle. That's why it's green, I think. Probably why it's green. So just take deep vintage Euro Italia, made in Italy, Dolce and Gabbana, Perfume, and then shove a large dose of violet leaf right in the middle of it. If that sounds good to you, all the smoothness and the lavender and the lemon and the tobacco of the deep vintage, all that smoothness, but then a big violet note right in the middle, violet leaf. If you can handle that, then this is your guy. And that's why it's this instead of that. Here we go. Drakkar Noir, Duc de Vervins by Hubigant. This instead of that. I think most of you know by now Drakkar Noir, what it smells like. It was a fragrance that basically created an entire trope, and there were at least a dozen fragrances in the 80s that all tried to smell like this. There was Xerius by Givenchy, Taxi by Coffin Lux, Lomani Pour Homme, Alain Delon Plus, Caesar's Man Legendary Cologne, Gucci Nobile. Some of you are going to clap back at me, but yes, Gucci Nobile was an attempt to parrot the style of Drakkar Noir. It had more oak moss in it and some other things, but by and large, it was an attempt to compete in that space. Your little fantasy land doesn't like hearing that because you put these things on a pedestal, and you worship them like they're gods, but unfortunately, that's the reality of it. And then, of course, along the way, you had this little guy, which originally launched in '85 as a limited edition, then kind of disappeared and reemerged in 1991 when Hubigant restructured. See, the reason why it had a soft launch and then disappeared for like 6 years was Hubigant basically went bankrupt pretty much like a year after this came out. So this would have probably had a big launch in '85, '86 if the company wasn't on the ropes. But They ended up getting reorganized, sold off a lot of their fragrances. Stuff like Chantilly went to Dana and a couple others, and they had a big fire sale on a lot of their fragrances. Things like Fougere Royale and Quelque Fleur and this fragrance stayed, but a lot of other ones went to other houses. So eventually, once they got their shit together and they were able to make fragrances again, they did a full-fledged launch in '91, and then the fragrance has been produced pretty much ever since. It's never left production since '91. Now, Luca Turin hates this fragrance, and he calls it a sad fougere or something. And a lot of the, stuck-up people with the pinkies out, and the Dr. Evil, and like this, they don't want to try anything that Luca Turin dislikes. If he says it's bad, then they automatically go like that to it. Oh, our Lord and Savior says it's bad, so we can't touch it. And even though I like Luca Turin, I've talked to him a couple times on Bass Notes. He's not there anymore, but he used to be on Bass Notes. He understands that his opinion is his opinion. He might be educated and all that stuff, and he might have doctorates and things, but he'll be the first person to tell you not to take his opinion with any more, sort of reverence than anybody else who's reviewing perfume, because his opinion's opinion. So, but that doesn't stop people from taking him way too seriously, and they tend to. And so there were a lot of folks who sadly did not go near this. They left it alone. And that's why it's still relatively inexpensive. A lot of the other Houbigot fragrances are much more expensive. They cost much more money. You don't get discounts on them. But this one just kind of hangs around. So it is one of the better values from the house, honestly. And the reason why I say this instead of this, Verbena. Duc de Vervins takes the Drakkar Noir structure and injects one of the best lemon verbena notes I've ever smelled right into the top and heart of it. So automatically that makes this a greener, fresher, more sunny, bright, positive, just more vibrant fragrance. It's the noir, I guess, taken out of Drakkar Noir. The smokiness is not there. Okay, it's just a much more naturalistic, vibrant take on that style. But if you don't like the style of Drakkar Noir anyway, the dihydromercenol, all of the sheer sort of clean stuff that it's got going on, then you're not going to appreciate this. But another thing this has is more clary sage. So you get more clary sage and that lemon verbena. And honestly, I like this better. I wear this way more often than I wear this. I have a backup of this, and I don't have a backup of this. Okay, so we're going to do one more, and then we're going to call it quits. one that you're not going to expect me to do. This is what makes it fun. Instead of 1 Million by Paco Rabanne, Jay-Z Gold by Parlux, I think. Real quick, since a lot of you guys don't really like anything that's even remotely close to this. Very sweet tobacco, vanilla, blood orange, just a very sweet clubbing fragrance. I like it, but I understand its reputation. So dial back the sweetness, take out the blood orange, increase the patchouli, so more patchouli, and then add a blueberry note, which you don't see very often. That's not really a thing. So a blueberry patchouli infused, just more original, more interesting, frankly, take on a similar sweet sort of tobacco clubber fragrance. Also much less vanilla, much less vanilla than 1 Million. So yeah, just sharper, fruity in a very interesting way, green with the patchouli. Just, if you want to have that kind of late 2000s vibe, but you want to do it in a way that's going to stand apart, even if you dislike celebrity fragrances, you know, and Jay-Z is not everyone's cup of tea, but the gold is actually surprisingly good. It was discontinued, so it used to be cheap. Now it's not cheap anymore. But honestly, if you can get it, yeah, it's much, just a much quirkier take on that style. And there you have it, guys. There's my this instead of that. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. This has been the Unlist.